No, hip hop was as underground as it would ever be at that point. And at that point, I hadn't met Jerry yet. I would meet Jerry a couple years later. But I got into it from listening to mixtapes that my cousin in Brooklyn would send to us. So my introduction to hip hop was probably in this order. The Sugar Hill Gang, Sucker MCs by Run DMC, a song called Cracked Out by Masters of Ceremony, which I think was Grand Poobah's first group before Brand Nubian and his solo work, and Just Ice and T-La Rock. Just Ice had a song called LaToya, and T-La Rock had a song called It's Yours. And then I started to hear Detroit stuff after that. I took it pretty far.
What's some of the highlights?
Highlights. Me and Eric would go on to bring on Bennett White, my man DJ Close Cut, my cousin soul brother K. Kenny. We would evolve through different names, but ultimately under the name The Crew Called Open Mic, we would release one EP and one album. I will be brutally honest. I wasn't heavily involved at the hip hop shop. You know, a lot of the brothers there will probably tell you they didn't see me often. I went a couple of times. I only got in a cypher one or two times. My connection to the hip hop shop by that point was through journalism. I was writing about a lot of the cats that were at the hip hop shop. So whether it was Royce, Proof, Eminem, La Peace, the brothers in Slum Village, the original cats in Slum Village, including their original members from Cinepod, Platinum Pied Pipers. You know, I was covering those cats at the time. DJ Head and I, Eminem's first DJ, we were teaching at the same school, Ann Arbor Trail, Middle Magnet School. So that's how I kind of knew those cats, and you know, Paul Rosenberg when he was still going by Paul Bunyan. And that was kind of like my connection to the hip hop shop. But I would say none of those MCs, I didn't really give those MCs at the hip hop shop a chance to recognize me in that space as an MC. They recognized me as the writer. I wrote for my school paper in high school and maintained that interest. Went away to college and became, I started a column called The Melanin File in college. I went to Xavier University in Cincinnati. So a column called The Melanin File on a white campus garnered a lot of attention. And I took those clips, and Eric's older sister, Sean Rhea, connected me to Reggie Dennis at the Source magazine. And I sent Reggie clips, and Reggie called me back. This was right after I graduated college and moved back to the city. Called me back and offered me my first feature assignment, a 2,500 word story for the Source magazine called The House That Crack Built. It was talking about the 10-year history of crack cocaine in Detroit. And at that time, Detroit was recognized as the murder/crack capital of the country. And in that story, I interviewed 4 individuals, 2 dealers, 2 users. And it was a heavy, heavy experiential story. As a journalist, you're supposed to be objective. That's a hard thing to do when you're writing about the guys. It's like the guy who grew up in the neighborhood becoming a cop. You know, it's that feeling. So because of that, I leaned heavily on feature writing, because feature writing always allows you to tell the truth through the subject's voice. I'm telling Khan's story, I'm telling Slum Village's story. And the questions that I'm asking now are the questions that you gave me by the way you live your life. I think a perfect example is when I wrote a story about Royce and Proof's reconciliation after their beef, which we all know got heated, got violent, guns were drawn, they ended up in jail, and then they squashed their beef sitting in a jail cell and decided that they would talk about it on the record. And by the time I got to them as a journalist, there were no questions that I could make up that would piss them off at that time. They had done all the pissing off that they could possibly muster, and all I had to do was ask the questions that would help them to revisit the facts, and it went well. But often, you know, it could be awkward covering hip hop as an MC. One was a cover story for Metro Times that I wrote about Slum Village right after Baten, well, right after being, you know, maybe a year or so after Baten left the group. That was an interesting story because I walked into that story expecting, you know, acrimony and mudslinging. Mm-hmm. And what I saw was that, one, I could tell that those cats really, really love each other. You know, they grew up together in Coleman Gardens, and then they were really honest in telling their story. You know, interviewing Baten was fascinating because he was very open about his struggles with mental illness, drug addiction, the connection between the two, you know, the self-medicating process, and his responsibility and accountability in the stuff that led to his removal from the group. Meanwhile, T3, you know, who's never a guy to reveal a lot. He's kind of a private guy, you know, but he was really respectful of Baten and Dilla. You know, I mean, you know, history shows when Dilla left Slum Village, it was rather abrupt. You know, he went and did his thing, and he's a legend. So nobody knocked him for it because he obviously had a vision for himself. But T3 wasn't the guy who sat back and acted like he was jilted. You know, he got where Dilla was headed, you know. So he was stand-up about it. You know. Was a song that I was just getting ready to record that was left with no production. It was called The Servant's Life. And it ended up being my signature poem. It was a song turned poem that dealt with a planned slave revolt. And at the time that poetry became a part of my life, I was at this point where, as an MC, I was clearly going to be labeled conscious. Conscious music was clearly becoming less appealing in the marketplace as a sellable commodity. You know, it had a voice, it had a purpose and a presence in many of our lives. But let's face it, at that point, the backpackers weren't the ones rushing to the record stores and spending a lot of money on albums. So I didn't know where a career was going to develop in this piece. And Mahogany became a much needed, a critical outlet at that point in my life. And I met brothers and sisters who are friends to this day. I consider them family to this day. Their money is no good with me when they need a favor, or not even a favor, when they just need some involvement. You know, if I have the time, I'm there. And it became a defining place. And you're right, without poetry, BBC doesn't happen, because Sin Durbin was on that stage drumming. Kamau Anayade was on that stage playing bass. Carl DJ Invisible Olier was in there spinning. And although all of us have now gone on to do other things with our lives, we all consider BBC like the tree trunk in our creative life. But for me, Mahogany and hip hop were the roots to that tree.
Now, how did BBC?
After I'd been active at Mahogany for a year or so, I got the itch to make music again. And my wife, Tunisia, was the first person who suggested that I form a band. And she literally said, well, you've gotten cool with the drummer and the bass player at Mahogany. They're not in bands, so, you know. Actually, Kamau was in a band called the Maroons. But she said, you know, just ask them. And she pushed me until I went to him and said, yo, you know this book I've been saying is coming out? This Out of You book? All of that stuff is just about songs that never got recorded, you know, that I turned into poems. Why don't we form a band and just start performing it? And the first two brothers to come on board were Kamau and Sin, Carl, and Tunisia. And then Kiris Wardlaw joined. She had been singing with a family sextet called the Blessed Hearts. Then Swami came on, Mark Harper, as our keyboard player. Malik Austin did one show as our keyboard player before Swami. So we just kind of put pieces together as we went along. Eric Eric Perry, who used to own Caboodle's Records. He was a big supporter of ours early on. And once we got this outfit together, it took us about a year to start gelling as a band and really start forming a sound. And then Curious moved, and we met Karen Vesprini, Bosco, who's been with us ever since. And then Swami brought Ted in, our guitar player, Ted Candidate. So we over a 2 to 3 year period built this like Voltron kind of unit. And then from there we just honed the sound, man, and rolled.
How long was your run?
Our very first show was February 4th, 2000, Bob Marley's birthday. We formed in 99 and first performed February 4th, 2000 at Cafe Aroma on the east side, Canton and Kercheval. And we performed our last show at the Arab American Museum in June of 2010. So it was literally a 10-year run. And then at that point, we had started to open businesses and build our careers, and many of us started to put our degrees to use, including me. We ended up taking a 6-year break, and here we are now, preparing for a reunion. I think the thing that I'm most proud of about BBC is the community that came out of it. You know, the fact that everybody's doing all right. You know, our behind the music would be very boring because we didn't end up on drugs and nobody's on the other side of the law. Everybody is like married with a child, a successful business. You know, Mark just produced a beer out of his brewery that just got voted the #1 beer in the world of its kind. Carl's been around the world several times, touring with Exhibit. Kamal is now a member of Collective Peace and a hired gun as a bassist. Kamal used to stumble over bass tracks. I mean, stumble. He would like screw up a song, man. He'd fuck up a song in a minute. We have to stop. And now he's one of the best bassists in the city. You know, so I'm real proud of that, man. You know, we're getting ready to do a family picture with all the members and all of our children and spouses. And I did a count, and there are 30 of us total. You know, there was only one married couple when we started. Now there's only one single guy. You know, so I mean, there's a real community, man, that came out of BBC. We really became Black Bottom County, you know, over the years. And then, you know, it's a multicultural group, man, that really became friends and family. That's not something you see all the time in a city as divided as Detroit. But I'm really proud of that, man. I'm proud of the people in that crew. The experience was enlightening, painful, because, you know, I've always been upfront about the fact that the former mayor is a relative. He's through marriage, you know, but you know, we're very much in the African tradition. We don't do in-laws, you know. He's my cousin. And I was also qualified to write his book because I am a journalist and a writer. So it was painful because we spent 3.5 years walking through this process, and it was hard sometimes to stay in my lane as a writer and not get in the way of the story. Because in the back of my mind, I'm always saying, I hope this situation works out for him and the city, you know? And I wasn't involved. The book didn't deal with his federal proceeding at all. It only dealt with the state and city-based issues that led to his first 1.5-year stint in jail. That was his state case where he spent 1.5 years in Jackson. So I never knew anything about the federal process, but in that sense, it was painful because I watched him and his family, my family, be severely impacted by what was going on. You know, I always say, you know, we have to be accountable for the things we do. But groupthink is real also. And sometimes when an entire community buys or a great enough portion of a community buys into a person's guilt, especially a public figure, it becomes difficult to keep things paced enough that the punishments fit the crime. And at some point, the danger is that innocent individuals who are connected to that individual get unnecessarily hurt. So I have family members, man, who they had to move out of town to get peace, to find peace again. They had to move to communities that are the polar opposite in makeup of Detroit. And the thing that I get is that everybody wants a healthy city, wants Detroit to be at its best, and wants leaders they can trust. But I don't think anybody is out in situations like the former mayors. I don't think anybody is out to intentionally hurt people who don't deserve it, But sometimes the fervor becomes so severe that becomes unavoidable. So I say that to say, I did my job as a writer. I did it well. The book was critically acclaimed. But it was such a painful period that I hardly kept a copy. It's out there somewhere. I have a copy boxed up somewhere at the house. But I had to, my family and I, we had to just pack up, heal up, and move on, because there's still a life and a contribution to make to the people of this city. And thank God I'm in a position now to do it here at Coleman A. Young Foundation. But I will never forget those 3.5 years of my life, ever.
And that leaves us what you just brought up. What's your position here?
I'm extremely proud of this foundation. I'm executive director of Coleman A. Young Foundation. This is Mayor Young's, this organization is Mayor Coleman Alexander Young's living legacy. And our mission is very simple. We develop leadership, we focus on young Detroiters, and we do it by awarding scholarships that are valued up to $20,000, significant awards. And we also develop them and help them get ready for college, But we don't just give money, we mentor our students until they graduate from college. And as a result of that, our graduation rate is 91% over the last 21 years. So that's where I kind of come away from the jargon. That's the elevator speech. But just imagine, kids from the North End and Herman Gardens when it was still standing. Some of the roughest neighborhoods in the city, going to college, being mentored, being given a shot, and then 9 out of 10 of them graduating. So you're talking about kids, man, who, their families' histories in some cases have more stories of incarceration than graduation, These kids are going off to school and doing their thing, and then 60% of those graduates are coming back home and contributing to the city, and they're outstanding professionals. They're good people. When Mayor Young founded the foundation in 1982, he practically gave away his remaining $3 million to do two things: endow a professorship at Wayne State University and endow the Coleman A. Young Foundation. Most politicians' foundations go away with them. Here we are 20 years after this man's passing, almost 18 years after his death, and we're still standing, still going strong. We just gave away 6 scholarships this year. I just watched a young woman who was mentored by us and supported by the Skillman Foundation graduate from Stanford University with a degree in African American Studies and I think a minor in literature. She's an amazing writer, and she's back home now working for Rack It Up, Detroit. I could go on and on about the foundation, because now it's like, one, I feel like I'm getting a chance to do my life's work as a servant, and 2, I'm not in this position if it's not for hip hop. That's what's hot about all this. Hip hop gave me the foundation that I use to learn how to express myself, speak publicly, present myself, do it in an appropriate manner, understand and adjust to audiences. And I used all that when I interviewed for this role. Fatherhood is what made life make sense. You know, I now understand my real purpose. Everything that I do is really meaningless if I don't have someone to pour it into. Every experience, every lesson learned, wisdom, love, it all goes to my son in spades, you know. My wife and I had been married for 16 years when he was born. We were getting ready to go for adoption. And when I finally became the last one in the marriage to get serious about adoption, she got pregnant. And I think there's some spiritual value in that. I think there's some, the word is escaping me, some karma there at work, some blessings. I think someone was waiting for me to get serious about becoming a father. And then at that point, for the first time, we got pregnant. Then Max came along and the world just kind of fell into place, you know. My perspective is layered because I tend to look at these situations and always say, what's my responsibility in it first, you know? And that's just me not wanting to feel like the victim. But the truth is, gentrification is here, what it is in Baltimore and Cleveland and other cities. You love the way things look and you hate feeling excluded. That's it. And there is an air of exclusivity in the Detroit that's developing. Neighborhoods should be involved. And here is where I would say we need to be cautious. Detroit historically is not a conventional city. It has not responded to exclusion the way most cities in America respond. Detroiters at some point historically get angry and then they get active. And you don't know what comes of that. You know, sometimes organization comes from it, sometimes rebellion comes from it. You know, and that's not a warning, but it is me saying people who don't learn history and honor history are doomed to repeat it. And again, I lead a foundation that plucks some of the most phenomenal talent from some of the roughest parts of town, you know. So there is value, man, in our neighborhoods. There's talent in our neighborhoods. Don't come into a city calling it a blank slate when you have generations of Detroiters who have worked hard just to keep this thing afloat, even if we did tread water, you know? You have to engage the people in the community. And that said, you also have a right to invest in the city. I don't think we're having as angry a conversation about gentrification if more Detroiters who have been here for decades are simply involved. I don't even think people want to necessarily take it over. They just want to be involved. They want to know that I can get enough of this to help rebuild my neighborhood and provide for my family. That's it. That still leaves millions for the taking for anyone who comes to the city intent on profiting.